doing to implement permitting and certificates in this country with the flying of unmanned aerial systems, because we've got a robust civilian aviation population in this country. And if you've got visual flight rules and you've got a civilian aviator that goes up in his Cessna 172, he's not following a flight plan. He currently probably not looking to see if there's a certificate of whether the sheriff is flying a drone in the area. These drone pilots, they're not looking forward for other aircraft in their airspace. They're looking down at whatever they're surveilling. And so I think there's a real threat to civilian aviation with the unmanned aerial systems, especially if we see a dramatic increase that is projected based on the information that's been provided today. So I think that is a valid question that we need to talk to FAA about with regard to civilian aviation and VFR flight rules. The gist of my concern about drones and unmanned aerial systems is the privacy issue. It's a real issue. It's a real concern to the constituents that I represent. It's a real concern to Americans all across this great land on what the government is surveilling. We just had recently an episode, I think, in Nebraska where farmers were upset that the EPA was flying aircraft and possibly UAVs to check their fencing and whether their cattle were getting in streams, and enforcement issues. Are they going to use UAS for that going forward? I'm a co-sponsor of Austin Scott's bill, which I think is an important piece of legislation. When I think about privacy issues, I think about what we've done in the war on terror and surveillance of people we suspect are involved in terrorism. In order to listen in their phone conversations, whether cell phone or landline, the FISA court's involved. Well, is the FISA court going to be involved with unmanned aerial systems surveilling American citizens in this country on what their activities are, whether it's terrorist activities or narcotic activities? You know, where is the right of privacy, and where does a court such as FISA get involved in this? I think these are legitimate questions that we need to ask. You know, we have an Office of Privacy within Homeland Security that the chairman mentioned earlier. That Office of Privacy is there for a reason. Is to make sure that the Department of Homeland Security is involved in making sure that the privacy rights of United States citizens aren't violated as we try to protect this great country. Is that Office of Privacy involved with the Department of Homeland Security with regard to unmanned aerial systems? I think it's a valid question for us to ask, and I want to thank Amy for being here. And I was just going to ask you, what methods of civil liberty protection do you feel are best to cooperate with this growth in UAS?
We think that the best principles to always look at are transparency and accountability. So we're looking at, again, procedures at FAA to make sure that drone operators aren't allowed to utilize their drones for purposes outside of what they have initially been licensed for. We want to see DHS implement regulations protecting privacy, ensuring that they cannot be used for generalized surveillance. We think that that is not in line with constitutional principles and should not be used. And then we would like to see, as we have proposed in our longer statement, legislation that is really geared toward protecting these rights. We think that it's important to do this now, as previous witnesses have stated. Violations have not occurred yet, and if we wait for the drones to go up in the air before we act, I think that we're going to regret it.
Yeah, well, thank you for protecting civil liberties in this country and what you're doing. You know, I come from South Carolina. We're on the coast. There's a threat of hurricanes. I can see and understand certificates issued for whether it's the EPA or whether it's the Homeland Security or some organization to fly the coastline prior to a hurricane coming in to assess changes in the environment, take real-time actual aerial photos that can be used. I can understand a certificate being issued for Customs and Border Patrol if they know there's an area of the border that's being exploited. One-time certificate. I can understand the need for some sort of privacy committee to issue those certificates. I can understand a one-time certificate or temporary certificate being issued to a sheriff if you had a prison break or you had a lot of drug activity. But these are isolated incidents. These aren't carte blanche flying of unmanned aerial systems across this country. So I want to ask Mr. Dillingham, why has the Department of Homeland Security been so slow to develop policies and guidance related to the domestic use of drones?
That's a good question, sir, and we have not been able to get an answer from DHS or TSA why they have not, followed our recommendations. We have been told by many stakeholders that it's better to act on these potential issues before we have a crisis or before some of these things occur, because oftentimes, not only does it take regulations 2-3 years to be enacted, but oftentimes when regulations are enacted in a crisis situation, sometimes they aren't the best work that the agencies do. So we continue to follow up with DHS and point out that we think they have a role in the UAV situation as well, as they're both in terms of privacy as well as security.
Right. Well, I don't want to wait for a crisis situation, and if I know this chairman as well as I think I know him, I believe we'll have Department of Homeland Security sitting where you're sitting to answer these tough questions, and I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for his confidence in his chairman, and let me just say, not only